Hello and welcome back to RPG PhD. I'm Dr. Ben. Today I want to introduce a figure from acting theory whose ideas turn out to be surprisingly useful for tabletop role-playing games. Someone you may not recognize, but whose work aligns closely with how play actually unfolds at the table. Jerzy Grotowski. Grotowski was a 20th century theater director and theorist, best known for what he called poor theater, a radical approach that stripped performance down to its essentials. His ideas come from theater, but they raise a question that should feel immediately familiar to anyone who runs or plays tabletop games. What is the minimum required for something to feel truthful, alive, and meaningful? That question turns out to be surprisingly useful when we start thinking about RPG design and game mastering. So grab a drink and let's get started. At the core of Grotowski's work is the idea of poor theater. The word poor here is misleading if you take it at face value. Grotowski wasn't talking about theater with fewer resources because of necessity. He was talking about theater that deliberately removes anything that isn't essential to the act itself. No elaborate sets, no reliance on spectacle, no technology to carry the emotional weight. What remains once all of that is stripped away is the relationship between people in a shared space, making intentional choices and responding to one another in real time. For Grotowski, that relationship formed the core of the work. Tabletop role-playing games already operate under similar constraints. We don't usually have sets, costumes, lighting cues, or sound design, says the person who does all of those things, at least not in any formal sense. What we do have are people, rules, procedures, imagination, and a shared commitment to play. And yet, within those limits, role-playing games regularly produce moments of tension, emotion, risk, and meaning that rival far more elaborate forms of media. Grotowski's work gives us a way to understand why that works, and just as importantly, how it sometimes breaks down. We're going to treat Grotowski as a design thinker, someone deeply concerned with presence, constraint, intentionality, and the removal of anything that interferes with meaningful action. When we look at game mastering and design through that lens, clear patterns begin to emerge. Excess mechanics can block intention instead of supporting it. Unclear procedures dilute commitment. Presence at the table is often undermined by friction, by things that get in the way of decisive action and clear response. We're generally working with almost nothing, a table, some dice, some rules, and a shared imagined space. And yet we often respond to that constraint by adding more. More mechanics, more subsystems, more lore, more prep, more explanation, under the assumption that richness comes from accumulation. Grotowski's work invites a different question. What happens if richness comes from subtraction? In RPG design and game mastering, this means taking a hard look at what actually contributes to meaningful play and what quietly gets in the way. Not every rule adds clarity. Not every subsystem creates better decisions. Not every paragraph of lore improves immersion. Some elements exist primarily because they feel like they should be there, not because they meaningfully shape player action. Poor theater reframes this as a design discipline. If a mechanic doesn't change how players decide, it may be noise. If a rule doesn't influence risk, commitment, or consequence, it may be friction. If a scene requires constant clarification to function, it may be overloaded. This doesn't mean rules light is automatically better or that complexity is bad. Grotowski wasn't anti-structure, he was anti-clutter. The question is whether the structure you're using serves action or competes with it. A complex rule that sharpens decision-making earns its place. A simple rule that muddies intention, maybe not. For game masters, poor theater shows up as a shift in focus. Instead of asking, what else should I add to this scene, the more productive question becomes, what can I remove so the core tension becomes clearer? Sometimes that means fewer NPCs. Sometimes it means fewer contingencies. And sometimes it means trusting the players to act without pre-explaining every possible outcome. For example, the party enters a town on the verge of unrest. In prep, the game master has layered in multiple factions, several named NPCs, and overlapping subplots. At the table, players hesitate, unsure about what really matters. Using a poor theater approach, the game master pares the scene down to its essentials. One guard enforcing an unpopular order, and one merchant directly affected by it. Explanations about hidden factions and possible outcomes are removed. What remains is clear, visible tension and a situation that demands response. With fewer elements competing for attention, players act decisively because the core conflict is now legible. For designers, the same principle applies at the system level. Poor theater encourages us to identify the minimum viable structure that still produces meaningful choice. What is the least amount of machinery needed for this game to express its values? Where does complexity actively help, and where does it merely decorate? So, for example, a designer sets out to create a game about desperate exploration in a dying world. Early drafts include detailed encumbrance rules, complex weather subsystems, crafting trees, morale mechanics, and multiple resolution methods for travel, survival, and social encounters. Playtests reveal that players spend most of their time managing systems rather than making difficult choices about where to go, what to risk, or who to trust. Applying a poor theater lens, the designer begins removing machinery. Encumbrance is collapsed into a single burden track. Weather no longer has its own subsystem. It modifies existing roles. Crafting is reduced to a few high-impact options tied directly to survival decisions. What remains is a tight loop, limited resources, clear travel procedures, and escalating consequences for delay or failure. With the excess stripped away, the game's values become visible. It rewards commitment to a path, forces trade-offs between safety and progress, and makes hesitation costly. Presence at the table increases because players are no longer navigating decorative complexity. They are engaging directly with risk and consequence. By identifying the minimum structure needed to express those values, the designer creates space for the human element of play to surface, which is exactly the foundation Grotowski argued meaningful action requires. When you strip a game down to its essentials, you start to see what it's actually about. You see what it rewards. You see where commitment happens. And you see where presence at the table either emerges naturally or gets buried under excess. This idea of removal sets the foundation for everything else Grotowski was interested in. Once Grotowski stripped theater down to its essentials, his attention shifted to the performer as the primary instrument of the work. In his view, the actor's body, breath, voice, and attention were the primary tools of the work. Technique wasn't about adding tricks or polishing performance. It was about removing blockages that prevented clear, committed action. Training for Grotowski was less about learning how to act and more about learning how to stop getting in the way. That idea translates to tabletop role-playing games in a surprisingly direct way. Players are not performers in the traditional sense. They're not delivering rehearsed lines or projecting emotion to an audience. Instead, they function as instruments of decision-making. The performance at the table isn't scripted dialogue, it's choice under uncertainty. What matters is the clarity with which intention moves from player to system and the legibility of the system's response. From this perspective, a lot of common table friction starts to make sense. When players hesitate, over-explain, or retreat into meta-discussion, it's often because something is obstructing the flow of intention. The system may be unclear, the stakes may be muddy, the consequences may feel disconnected. In Grotowski's terms, the instrument is blocked because the conditions for clear action aren't present. This reframes how we think about good play. Good play in this view isn't about dramatic speeches, clever optimization, or staying perfectly in character. It's about unencumbered intention. A player knows what they want to do, understands the risks, and commits. The system receives that input and responds in the way the player can interpret. That loop, intention, action, response, is where presence at the table lives. For game masters, this has an important implication. Your role in this view isn't to coax better performances out of players, is to reduce the friction that interferes with intention. That might mean clarifying what kind of situation the players are in. It might mean simplifying how an action is resolved. It might mean letting go of unnecessary explanation and trusting the system to do its work. For example, the party plans to escape a crumbling tower while enemies close in. Players hesitate, asking about exact distances, turn order, and which abilities apply. Instead of encouraging more dramatic description or tightening the clock with narration, the game master simplifies the situation. They declare that the tower is collapsing in stages, establish a single escalating danger track, and explain how each attempt to move, hold ground, or help another character interacts with it. Once the structure is clear, the game master stops elaborating. The players immediately begin making hard choices: who to save, who to slow down, and how much risk to accept, because the friction between intention and resolution has been removed and the system is now doing the work. At the design level, the same principle applies. Rules should support expression, not obstruct it. A well-designed mechanic channels intention cleanly. A poorly designed one forces players to wrestle with procedure instead of making decisions. Complexity can be valuable, but only when it sharpens choice. When it dulls intention, it becomes a blockage. For example, a designer creates a combat system intended to emphasize bold, cinematic action. In early drafts, resolving an attack requires selecting a maneuver, cross-referencing multiple modifiers, choosing from several reaction options, and resolving conditional exceptions. In playtest, players hesitate before acting because expressing a simple intention, I want to press the attack, requires navigating too much procedure. Reworking the system, the designer collapses those layers into a single choice: advance, hold, or withdraw. Each option carries a clear trade-off between risk and effect. The complexity hasn't vanished, it's just been relocated. Instead of living in calculation, it now lives in consequence. Players can act more quickly, commit more fully, and accept risk because the system allows intention to move directly into action. Engagement increases because the mechanics no longer block expression. Grotowski believed that when the instrument is clear, presence emerges naturally. The same is true at the table. When players don't have to fight the system to express what they want to do, engagement deepens. Decisions come faster, risks feel sharper. The game feels alive because intention is moving cleanly through the structure of play. One of Grotowski's most influential ideas is something he called via negativa, or the negative path. Rather than teaching actors what to add, new techniques, new gestures, new tricks, he focused on identifying and removing what blocked authentic action. It was about stripping away habits, defenses, and unnecessary effort that interfered with clarity and commitment. Poor Theatre and Via Negativa describe two related but distinct moves. Poor Theatre is about identifying and removing non-essential elements from the work itself, so the core action and tension become clear. Via Negativa is about improvement through subtraction at the level of practice, and removing those obstacles so action can flow cleanly. Poor Theatre focuses on what remains in the system, while Via Negativa focuses on what gets out of the way during play. A lot of Game Master advice is additive by default. Add more prep, add more backstory, add more NPCs, add more twists, add more mechanics. And while all those things can be useful, they can also quietly introduce friction. Via Negativa invites a different approach. Instead of asking what to add to make a session better, ask what can be removed to make play cleaner. In practice, game mastering by subtraction often looks deceptively simple. Fewer contingency plans, so player choices actually matter. Fewer explanatory monologues, so players discover information through action. Fewer overlapping mechanics, so decisions resolve cleanly instead of bogging down in procedure. Each removal reduces cognitive load and increases the speed at which intention turns into action. This also applies to moment at the table. When a scene stalls, the instinct is often to explain more, to restate the situation, clarify motivations, or offer hints. The negative path suggests a different diagnostic step. Identify what's blocking decision making. Is the risk unclear? Is the action space too broad? Is the consequence too abstract? Often removing a layer of uncertainty does more than adding a layer of explanation. For example, a scene grinds to a halt as players debate what to do next. Instead of adding hints or re-explaining the situation, the game master pauses and identifies the blockage. The risk isn't clear. The game master clarifies what will happen if the players delay and then steps back. With that single layer of uncertainty removed, the players make a decision and the scene moves forward. There's also a social dimension to this. Game masters sometimes overfunction out of a desire to be helpful, answering every question, smoothing every edge, rescuing every misstep. The negative path asks what happens if the game master steps back just enough for the system to assert itself. Clear procedures, visible stakes, and consistent consequences often do more teaching than intervention ever could. At the design level, via Negativa becomes a powerful filter. Every rule, subsystem, or exception can be evaluated with a simple question. Does this remove friction from play or add it? If a mechanic exists primarily to handle edge cases that rarely occur, it may be teaching hesitation rather than confidence. If a subsystem requires frequent clarification, it may be competing with player intention instead of supporting it. So for instance, during playtesting, a designer notices that a rarely used exception rule consistently pauses the game while players ask how it works. Applying via Negativa, the rule is removed and its edge cases folded into the core mechanic. Play speeds up, decisions come faster, and players act with more confidence because the system no longer interrupts intention with clarification. Importantly, via Negativa is not about minimalism for its own sake. Grotowski wasn't trying to make theater empty, he was trying to make it honest. And the same applies here. The goal isn't fewer rules or less prep, it's fewer obstacles between intention and consequence. When those obstacles are removed in this view, something interesting happens. Play becomes more focused, more decisive, and more present. Another central idea in Grotowski's work is his rejection of realism as the primary goal of theater. He was not interested in imitation or illusion, making the stage look like real life. Instead, he treated performance as ritual, structured, intentional action repeated in a shared space to produce meaning. Truth, in this framework, doesn't come from realism. It comes from commitment to the act itself. That distinction maps cleanly onto tabletop role-playing games. RPGs are often discussed as simulations of combat, of social interaction, of worlds that behave like real ones. But at the table, what actually drives play in many games is not realism, it's procedure, dice rolls, turns, initiative, downtime actions, resource checks. These are not attempts to mirror reality. They are rituals in this context. They are repeated, formalized actions that signal importance, risk, and transition. The game part of RPGs. Rolling dice is a ritual. Calling for initiative is a ritual. Marking a condition, ticking a clock, leveling up, resting. These are all ritual moments. And like ritual in theater, their power comes from consistency. When procedures are stable and repeatable, players learn what matters. They recognize when a moment is dangerous, when it's consequential, when it's safe to experiment, and when it's time to commit. A single dice roll may be abstract, but repeated over time, it builds trust in the system's responses. This is where many RPG problems quietly emerge. In this view, when procedures are applied inconsistently, rushed past, or treated as optional, the ritual loses its weight. Stakes blur, outcomes feel arbitrary. Players begin to negotiate the process instead of engaging with it. That negotiation often gets framed as rules lawyering or disengagement, when it's really a breakdown in ritual clarity. From a game mastering perspective, this reframes a common impulse. Game masters often try to make play feel more natural by smoothing over mechanics, skipping steps, or improvising resolutions to preserve flow. Sometimes that works great, but over time it can erode the ritual structure that gives actions meaning. Grotowski's work suggests that presence doesn't come from hiding structure, it comes from inhabiting it fully. Ritual in this view also explains why repetition is not the enemy of engagement. Repetition allows players to build intuition. It turns mechanics into a shared language. And over time, players stop asking how things work and start making sharper decisions within that structure. At the design level, this highlights an important principle. Systems should treat their procedures as meaningful acts rather than just resolution tools. A rule that exists only to generate a number quickly may resolve uncertainty, but it won't generate presence. A procedure that clearly marks risk, commitment, and consequence teaches players how to participate in the game's ritual life. Grotowski believed ritual created conditions where something real could happen because it demanded attention and commitment. In role-playing games, well-designed procedures do the same thing. They create moments where players lean in, commit, and accept the outcome because the ritual makes it matter. One of Grotowski's most demanding ideas is what he called the total act. In his work, the total act described a moment of complete commitment when an actor's intention, action, and risk aligned fully in the present moment. The actor commits knowing there is no safety net, no half measure, and no way to step outside the act once it begins. That idea has a direct parallel in role-playing games. It's the moment a player makes a decisive choice under uncertainty. They understand the risk, they understand the stakes, and they act anyway. No hedging, no optimization, delay, no waiting to see what everyone else does first. I jump across the chasm. I accuse the Duke publicly. I stay behind to hold the door. These moments feel powerful because they're committed. The player accepts that the outcome might be costly, irreversible, or surprising, and chooses to act regardless. From a design perspective, total acts don't happen by accident. They require specific conditions. The risk has to be legible. The consequences have to matter, and the system has to respond in a way that honors the commitment being made. If outcomes feel arbitrary or if failure collapses play entirely, players learn to avoid these moments. If success is guaranteed, commitment loses its weight. This is where many systems unintentionally undermine the total act. Overly granular mechanics can fragment commitment into a series of reversible micro-decisions. Excessive safety valves can teach players that hesitation is always optimal. Conversely, opaque systems that hide risk make commitment feel reckless rather than courageous. For game masters, supporting the total act means framing moments where commitment is possible and then letting them land. That includes being clear about stakes, resisting the urge to soften consequences after the fact, and allowing outcomes to reshape the situation meaningfully. The game master's job in this view isn't to protect players from risk, it's to ensure that risk is understandable and consequential. At the design level, this highlights the importance of mechanics that reward decisiveness. Systems that allow players to trade safety for impact or certainty for speed naturally create space for total acts. Even failure, when handled well, reinforces commitment by showing that the choice mattered. Grotowski believed that the total act was where theater became honest, where something real occurred because the performer fully committed to the moment. In tabletop RPGs, these moments are often the ones players remember years later. In Grotowski's theater, there was no comfortable separation between actor and spectator. No fourth wall. No safe distance. The audience wasn't there to be entertained passively. They were part of the event. Meaning emerged from a live feedback loop between those acting and those witnessing, sharing the same space and the same moment. That relationship maps cleanly onto tabletop role-playing games, just with different roles. At the table, the game master and the players exist inside a continuous feedback loop. Players act, the game master responds. Players interpret that response and act again. This loop is the engine of play. When it's clear and responsive, the game feels alive. When it breaks down, everything else starts to wobble. What Grotowski helps us see is that game mastering is not performance in the entertainment sense. The game master is not an actor putting on a show for an audience, usually. Instead, the game master functions as the system's voice, the part of the game that observes player action and translates it into consequence. The quality of that translation determines whether players feel seen, understood, and supported in their decision making. Strong game master player feedback loops share a few characteristics. Responses are timely, they are proportional to the action taken, and they reveal change. Something in the world shifts even when the outcome is unfavorable. This teaches players how the system behaves and reinforces the idea that their choices matter. Problems arise when that loop becomes distorted. Delayed consequences weaken cause and effect. Overly vague narration obscures what changed. Excessive game master intervention can short-circuit player intention, while too little response can make actions feel weightless. In each case, the feedback loop loses clarity and players begin compensating. They may ask more questions, they may play more cautiously, or retreat into mechanical optimization. Grotowski's work reminds us that presence depends on reciprocity. Action without response feels hollow. Response without action feels performative. At the table, meaningful play emerges when players trust that the game will meet them halfway, that the world will answer decisively when they commit. From a game mastering standpoint, this reframes authority. It's about reliable response. Players don't need to know everything, but they do need to know that when they act, the game will answer in a way that they can interpret. That trust is what allows risk, experimentation, and total acts to occur. One of the great misunderstandings of Grotowski's work is the idea that stripping things away leads to looseness or chaos. In reality, the opposite is usually true. Grotowski believed that discipline is what makes freedom possible. It was the framework that allowed commitment, risk, and presence to emerge without collapsing into noise. At the table, freedom does not come from infinite options. It comes from legible constraints. When players understand what actions make sense, what resources are scarce, and what consequences follow from risk, they are able to act decisively. When those constraints are unclear or inconsistent, freedom becomes overwhelming and choice turns into hesitation. This is where good procedures matter. Clear turn structures, consistent resolution mechanics, visible resources, and predictable consequences all function as discipline. They narrow the decision space just enough to make meaningful choice possible. Within that structure, players can improvise freely because they know the boundaries they're working inside. Game masters often worry that structure will stifle creativity. Grotowski's work suggests the opposite. Creativity flourishes when players aren't guessing how the world works. A firm procedural spine allows the fiction to loosen, stretch, and surprise without becoming incoherent. Constraints don't limit imagination, they give it something to push against. From a game master perspective, this reframes authority yet again. Applying structure consistently supports players by giving them a reliable framework to act within. It means players don't have to negotiate the rules of reality every time they act. They can trust the system to hold even when things get messy. That trust is what makes risk feel exciting instead of arbitrary. At the design level, discipline shows up as restraint. Every rule teaches behavior. Every exception creates ambiguity. Well-disciplined systems choose their constraints carefully and apply them consistently. They don't attempt to model everything. They model the things that matter most to the game's identity, and they let the rest fall away. Grotowski believed that when discipline is internalized, it disappears from conscious thought. So if there's one takeaway here, it's this. Grotowski's work highlights how powerful play emerges through removing what interferes with intention, committing fully to action, and trusting structure to carry meaning. When we treat RPG design and game mastering as crafts of presence rather than performance, we create tables where clarity replaces hesitation and commitment replaces optimization. And as with most things on this channel, my goal here isn't to hand down a set of rules about how you should run your games. I'm interested in presenting theories, ideas, and frameworks, often borrowed from outside tabletop gaming, and exploring how they might apply to RPG design and game mastering. Think of these lectures as a lens for seeing your game in a new way. They are intended to be descriptive rather than prescriptive, focused on naming patterns, identifying principles, and offering tools you can test, adapt, or ignore based on what works at your table. Different groups need different structures, and no single approach fits every game. If something here gives you a new insight, a new question to ask, or a new tool to add to your RPG toolbox, then it's done its job. If this sparked ideas for your own games, or if you've seen these principles show up at your table, I would love to hear about it. So drop your thoughts or questions in the comment section below. If you found this useful, do give it a like, consider subscribing, and share it with someone who might enjoy thinking about RPGs in a different way. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.